Trautman is first introduced as a character in the 1972 novel, First Blood. As Rambo is being hunted by Sheriff Wilfred Teasle, Trautman arrives and introduces himself as director of the Green Beret program that trained Rambo. Trautman helps reorganize the National Guard units to better track Rambo. In the end, when Rambo has returned to Teasle's town and both men have been mortally wounded, Trautman finishes Rambo off with a shotgun and then tells the dying Teasle this. Trautman's relationship to Rambo in the novel sharply contrasts that portrayed in the movie of the same name. In the book, Rambo barely remembers Trautman, and in fact, after hearing his voice, he strains to recall him. Trautman then identifies himself as director of the school that trained you, over the car radio. In the book, Rambo doesn't reply to him and, in fact, says to himself, "The bastard. Turning on your own kind," referencing Trautman's assistance to Teasle. Their one significant interaction comes at the end of the book, when Trautman tells Teasle that he took the top of his Rambo's head off with this shotgun. According to the DVD special features to the film First Blood, Trautman's dossier records him as being born on July 6, 1929, in Columbus, Ohio. He graduated from Hilldale High School in Columbus in 1946. Trautman began his career in the United States Army after completing officer training at the University of Texas in 1950, where he also graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology. Commissioned a second lieutenant, Trautman was an infantry officer stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He was promoted to captain in 1956 and later to major in 1959. Between 1960 and 1963, Trautman underwent cross-training and became a CIA officer. He went on to join covert operations in Chile, Guatemala, and Cuba. Trautman first served in the Vietnam War as a 1st Division member of the Special Forces, Green Berets, in 1964. He was first deployed to the Southern Vietnamese Theater, May 1966. 4 years later, he was promoted colonel in 1970. From 1970 to 1973, Colonel Trautman was unit commander of Team Delta, that included his boot camp protege John Rambo. He directed CIA operations near the Cambodian border from 1973 to 1979. It is likely that between 1979 and 1982, Trautman was assigned stateside to work in the Department of Defense. As he alluded in the film to Rambo, he wasn't spending much time in Bragg lately, as his superiors had him in Washington, D.C., shining a seat with his ass. As an accomplished combat officer, Trautman was a recipient of several awards, including the Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star, the Soldier's Medal, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart, to name a few. At the time of Rambo's 1982 incident with local Washington state authorities, Trautman was listed as divorced with no children. Trautman is flown in from Fort Bragg to warn the Hope, Washington, Sheriff's Department of the extent of Rambo's fighting and survival capabilities once Rambo starts a one-man war against the brutal deputies. The officers do not take Trautman's warning seriously, though Trautman is the only one who can effectively communicate with Rambo. One source notes that Trautman, when describing the situation to the local officials as a war you can't win, was echoing warnings previously made against continuing involvement in the Vietnam War. The relationship between the characters differs between the novel and the film. In the novel, it is explained that Rambo had never met Trautman in person and had only heard Trautman's voice as a constant presence over the loudspeakers of the camp where Rambo was trained. In the film, Trautman states that he trained Rambo personally and commanded him directly in Vietnam. At the end of the novel, with both Rambo and Teasle gravely wounded, Trautman shoots Rambo in the head, mercifully killing him. In the film, however, Trautman stops Rambo from killing Sheriff Teasle, listens to his traumatic war memories, and persuades Rambo to surrender. An alternate ending shot for the film had Trautman preparing to shoot Rambo at the end but unable to go through with it. Rambo then grabs Trautman's hand to force him to shoot, effectively committing suicide. This ending was scrapped after it did poorly with test audiences. After Rambo's rampage in First Blood, he was arrested and sentenced to hard labor in a prison quarry. Trautman is now a member of Delta Force and was part of the operation to rescue POWs in Vietnam. Trautman visits Rambo in prison and offers him an opportunity to get out by undertaking a mission. Trautman then uses his influence to have Rambo released from prison to join the mission in the Far East so that Rambo can get a pardon. Trautman is initially more trusting in Marshall Murdoch, the CIA bureaucrat overseeing the mission, than Rambo is, as Rambo catches Murdoch in a lie about his service. When Rambo rescues a POW, Murdoch realizes that his war profits may be in jeopardy and forces his people to abort the mission, allowing Rambo to be captured by the Vietnamese and their Soviet-Russian allies. Trautman responds angrily, unable to help Rambo, but knowing that Rambo will survive and return for revenge. He argues with Murdoch about the situation, warning him of Rambo's anger. After Rambo comes back to the base and gives Murdoch an ultimatum to rescue the remaining POWs, Rambo shares a few words with Trautman before leaving, refusing Trautman's efforts to convince Rambo to return to the United States. Trautman tracks John Rambo down to a Buddhist monastery in the jungles of Thailand and tries to convince Rambo to join him on a mission in Afghanistan to supply Stinger missiles to the Afghan Mujahideen rebels, fighting the invading Soviet armies. Rambo refuses to join because he wants to put his violent past behind him and start a new life, and Trautman understands. Trautman undertakes to deliver the shipment himself, but is captured by the Soviets in Afghanistan, and Rambo decides to launch a one-man rescue mission into the Russian prison camp so he can get his only friend back home. Once again, Trautman's warnings about Rambo's brutality fall on deaf ears, and Trautman is saved by John. Trautman's role in Rambo 3 has been described as a well-meaning but naive extension of the broken and mismanaged American military system. The character's fate after Rambo 3 was never explained in the 2008 film, Rambo, but because Richard Crenna died before the film was made, it can be assumed that Trautman died between Rambo 3 and Rambo. Sylvester Stallone himself explained that the character died the same day Richard Crenna died. Even though Trautman was originally supposed to be replaced by James Brolin, Stallone felt it would be disrespectful to replace Crenna. In the fourth film, Trautman only appeared in flashbacks using archive footage from the previous films. The fourth film is dedicated to Crenna's memory. In the 2019 installment Rambo, Last Blood, the character appears in archival footage during the credits.